Let's dive in. Today, we are going to talk about, I'm going to share my screen to start. Governance as an AI prerequisite. So I always like to ask, and I know I'm on recording, so it's never too professional, but can everyone see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Great, great. I always like to double check, just in case. So, we'll give a quick introduction to the topic, to who we are, and to what we'll be talking about today, and then we'll kind of dive right in. So, for those of you that haven't met me before, my name is Adriano Marini. I'm the Director of Sales and Customer Success here at Cadence Solutions. We are a small system integrator here in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. And today we are here to talk about governance as an AI prerequisite. So, Steve and I are both extremely, extremely passionate about the fact that information governance is a prerequisite to succeeding with AI for a lot of reasons, not limited to what we talked about today. But I hold the optimistic opinion that this is kind of the golden moment for IG because people are really wanting to adopt AI. People are wanting to get deeper into it. And people are finally listening to the records managers, to the information governance people, to the people who weren't considered a prerequisite, who weren't considered someone extremely important to success in this realm before. Now that we have AI that can give us speed to garbage without good information, it becomes so much more important to be well governed and well informed about information governance to succeed in using AI properly. And that's a funny way to say it. I'm sure Steve will talk about some of those concerns or risks later on. But today we're going to go over a bunch of topics and kind of really get down to why is information governance key in this realm. So first off, we're going to introduce ourselves. And then I'm going to go off on a little tangent about one very specific issue. One example as to why information governance is so important to make AI safer. And then we're going to talk about what are we trying to accomplish? Why are we doing information governance in general? And then bring it back to how we can do better information governance quickly to make AI safer. And then Steve's going to talk a little bit about kind of some of those best practices and what we see in the market and some of the issues that we're facing and why information governance is so important for this. And then we'll talk about what you can do to get started. What's next in that journey for you and what gets you to a better place. So first off, who are we? Like I said, boutique system integrator located here in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. We have been working on records management our entire existence as a company. 14 years ago, Jordan, our founder, was working at a county just east of Edmonton, not dropping names, but generally speaking, that's who they are. And what happened was they hired a big name consulting firm and they blew something like $300,000 with absolutely no progress. So Jordan said, if this is the standard in the market, we can do better. And that is how Cadence was born. Since then, we've spent a lot of time with OpenText, so much so that we were OpenText Partner of the Year in 2021, when Microsoft called us into a back room, very shady-like, tapped us on the shoulder and said, why aren't you doing this for us? And since then, we've made a name for ourselves in the Microsoft world, working on governance across the Microsoft 365 environment, so much so that they've given us 4 separate partner designations, getting us ready for helping people who are adopting Microsoft 365. And the other piece that we always say is sometimes the Microsoft tools aren't enough. And as a result, we also partner with AvePoint. And AvePoint gives us some options for third-party plugins to improve information governance without necessarily getting rid of, what's in the what's in the Microsoft world. Sorry, I was about to say what's in the OpenText world. That's 10 years ago type of thing. So the Microsoft world is complex, and we hope that we're able to bring some thoughts and some opinions as to how you can do better information governance in that world. We've done a lot of work across a lot of different organizations. This is just a small selection of primarily public sector organizations that we've worked with. We've, again, been around since 2013, so that's 13 years this year, 14 years coming up, and we've done over 120 projects of information governance in both 365 and OpenText. So I'll stop my spiel now and I'll hand it over to Mr. Steve to do an introduction of himself and the hologram.
All right, so I get to do my spiel, and I will share my screen if it lets me, because this morning it didn't, but I think it is now. Yeah, oh, that's not the right screen. Oh, excellent. Sorry about that. I'm going to back all the way up here. That was bizarre. Anyway, now that's the right screen. Yes, we do a lot of this. Can you tell? Um, I have but one slide. And basically, I call this slide my website on a postcard. And I actually do sometimes hand it out as a postcard, where my friends at Cadence work on the technology side, and I'm speaking, broadly. Um, I'm on the business side, and there's a great area of overlap in between, which is why it's so great that we can talk about this together, because we're all circling the same issues, just with different point approaches to it. Um, so for me, it's all about the business and mitigating risk and capturing opportunities by doing good governance of structured data and unstructured stuff like records and stuff. I spent a lot of time talking about stuff because otherwise you get into the argument over vocabulary. Well, that's content. No, that's a record. No, it's the information that's important. So the information has to be good because that information underlies anything that you're trying to do. So today we'll be talking about AI, where it's particularly important because the whole point of AI is to take information that you give it and do something special with it. Fill in blanks, make decisions, and we'll get into it, but you don't want it to make your decision. You want it to inform your decision. And then we're back to the information that has to be good enough so you make a good decision. So I'll stop there, so we can get right to the point.
All right, thanks, Steve. I'm going to steal the screen share back. I promise this is not just going to be trading screen shares for the rest of the presentation. All right, so let's talk about one of the key risks facing AI adoption. I'm going to boil it down to one small problem that may be familiar if you have a Microsoft 365 environment. So I always say the point of SharePoint is to share. And without sharing, it's just point, and that's pretty boring. So people have that share button available to them always. And when they click that button, they see a screen that looks like this. Now, first off, that anyone link gives me the heebie-jeebies. I am very glad that most organizations turn off external file sharing so that anyone is not available to most users. And that's important, right? Because otherwise people can create links willy-nilly, information security out the window. The bad news that I have is that most organizations don't change the default away from people in my organization or people in this case, Cadence Solutions, Inc. What that means is when we click that share button, if we don't change the default, I am always just creating a link that is giving permission to my entire organization to see my file. And that may not seem like a big deal because, if they don't have the link, they don't have access. There's a problem. And let's talk about that. So let's pretend my name is Johnny. I want to share a document with Mary. Sally is from a different department, completely irrelevant to the document at hand. So I desire to share the document with Mary, and therefore I desire that I have access, that Mary has access, but Sally does not have access. So now what I do is I click the share button in SharePoint, and I say that I want to send that link to Mary, but I don't change the default. I just leave the default. It's people in my org as the default. So now what's happened is my desire is for Mary to have access, but now accidentally, because I didn't change that default, technically speaking, Sally has access. If Sally ever gets her grubby little fingers on my link, she would be able to get my document. But Sally has to get the link. Even though I've accidentally created a permission level for the whole organization, as long as Mary only has my link, it's never going to be an issue because no one's going to get to that document. But, dun dun dun, our friend Copilot makes that near to impossible. So even though, and there's supposed to be actually a little Copilot logo here, I apologize, but even though Sally is not supposed to have access and would not be able to get it if she didn't have the link, Copilot ruins the idea of security through obscurity. Before we could trust that if Sally didn't have access to the data, Sally would not be able to access the document. But with Copilot, Sally could ask Copilot for that document if she knows it exists. And because Copilot is just looking at the permission model, and because that link technically gives permission to everyone in the organization, it will give it back to Sally. And suddenly my document is no longer secure. This is just one, again, small example of how Copilot demolishes our ability to govern by obscurity and our ability to trust that as long as this didn't happen, the security isn't compromised. Copilot is intelligent to a degree, artificial intelligence, right? And it can break through some of those assumptions that we had and break through some of that trust that we had that allowed us to feel comfortable. There's lots of stories floating in the marketplace of this exact problem causing, damage, right? There's a story floating around that someone accessed sensitive payroll information because of this sharing issue. So that kind of information is, bringing, those types of stories, that kind of history is bringing governance back to the forefront, right? People are now asking, hey, do we have these issues? Do we have these problems? Are we handling this issue in a way that's going to let us turn on Copilot, or should we stop? And that is where, back to my optimistic point, people are now asking about data governance in a different way. So in my background, I came from a big consulting firm where I was in data analytics and AI as a business unit. And I did a lot of records management governance, but I also did a little bit of structured data governance. And that field as a practice is a little bit more mature, because obviously people were worried early on, if I want to do data analytics, I need to be good about knowing what data I have, knowing how good it is, and knowing how to access it. Otherwise, my dashboard is junk and no one's going to get anything of value from my data. Now comes AI, now comes large language models, and suddenly it's the same paradigm. We now need to know where our documents are they good quality, is access properly restricted, such that if Copilot touches it, it's not going to reveal something to someone that's wrong or that should not be revealed to them. So that the paradigm is the same, the context is different. It's what records managers have been yelling about for years, but never was really brought to the surface because we didn't have this tool that created the problem and brought it to the surface. So what are we trying to do? We are trying to get good governance in place, good information governance across our entire data estate. I am not going to ignore the structured data people out there, because they are our friends and we like them. And generally speaking, they're trying to accomplish the same thing. They've just had a head start because their problem was more visible for the past decade, and their struggle resulted in bigger organizations and bigger focus. We're at that starting point now. Bigger organizations, bigger focus, more resources for information governance because of the issue. So now, what are we trying to solve? We're trying to solve the same questions. We're trying to understand, what data do we have in our environment? What is the documents, the information, the files, the stuff that's in our environments, in our OneDrives, in our exchanges, in our SharePoint sites? Where is the data located? How do I get to it? Do I even have access to that SharePoint site that has all of the information that is considered our crown jewels? Are the crown jewels there, or are they actually spread out through 5 other sites that don't have any relationship to each other? Who owns the data? who can I go, whose door can I knock on in the real world to find out if a document is protected, to find out who owns a piece of information, all of that kind of stuff. And then most importantly, how do people use that data? Are people using Copilot or LLMs today? Are people searching? Are people navigating? Like, what is the way that people use that information that we either need to support or potentially even block? I went into an organization once where people were getting access to documents through some weird search workaround because they didn't have access through the front end. And as a result, they were getting access to the data they needed to do their work, but they had to do the workaround to even be productive. So that type of thing, again, just a small example of how information governance comes to bear day to day in ways that may not necessarily be expected. So I like to show this slide, and I put at the bottom, copyright of Microsoft, because this is a Microsoft slide. And I like to spend a bit of time on this, because for all the grand things that we wish we could do with information governance, and for all the time we wish we could spend on it, our executives are banging at the door and saying, I want my Copilot, give me my Copilot, how do I get my Copilot? And that pressure isn't necessarily turning into making bad decisions, which is good. But that pressure is causing people to want quicker solutions. Because let's be real, and I'm sure Steve would support this, the process of getting good information governance across the board can take years in some cases for some organizations. It's not a simple journey. We wish it was, although if it was, Steve and I probably wouldn't have jobs, But it is one of those things where it takes time. So what can you do in the short term to start the process, to get yourself in just a little bit of a better place, to make that jump easier and to get you prepared for the bigger overarching journey in the future? This one is really easy from a Microsoft perspective. So if you're using Microsoft 365, they've taken the time to give you some tools to accelerate that step. The content management governance path at the very top there, that's the broad overarching information governance piece. That's where we want to get to, and that's what might take time, effort, and ultimately resources to accomplish in your organization. But the bottom piece, this is where we get a little bit more tactical. Things we can do in the short run, things we can do quicker to get us more ready faster. Number one, establish data retention and deletion policies. Oh, a retention schedule. Look, Microsoft put it on this slide. That is great. So have a retention schedule. Number two, apply retention labels and delete old records. Oh, it's what we've been yelling about for years. Please delete your old stuff. It's great. That is, again, something that is now becoming easier to do in tools, right? Because there's a lot of automation available, and there's a lot of features inside Microsoft 365 that make that question easier for people. But generally speaking, they're now recommending get rid of your old stuff. Get rid of stuff that you don't want Copilot to touch because it's out of date. Because the more stuff we feed Copilot that's out of date, that is, junk, the more that Copilot trains itself on stuff we don't want it to train. So get rid of the stuff you don't want to keep. Get rid of the rot. Get rid of the stuff that has been expired. Make sure you only have valid, recent data that Copilot can get to. The second one that they recommend is apply sensitivity labels. And this is a really important one. I can go on for a very long time. I can give a whole hour-long talk on how important I think sensitivity labels are. Because sensitivity labels are this tool in Microsoft 365 that give us so much power. Now, obviously, a sensitivity label is a label. You put a piece of metadata on a document, it gives us the capability to identify something as confidential, to identify how something should be handled. Up here in the Great White North, we use Protected A, Protected B, Protected C as the federal government standard. And generally speaking, the higher the letter, the more protected it is. Protected C is the stuff that should not be sent outside of the government. Protected B is usually personally identifiable information, so like health information of a citizen. That type of labeling policy takes time to get into place, of course, though, because we have to have a standard and we have to understand what classifies as each one and that kind of thing. If you are able to do that, then you have this capability to set up protected A, protected B, protected C as labels in Microsoft 365, which can then be applied to content. And these can be applied to records in OneDrive, Exchange, SharePoint, all of that kind of stuff. The benefit, though, is that once you apply that protected B label, for example, let's pretend, protected C is the highest. So once you apply a protected C label, we can say through a policy on the back end that that document can never be sent outside of the domain. We can say that if someone tries to share with a different organization, it is blocked. That permission level gives us the capability to be very granular about controls on this information. It also gives us the ability to either permit or deny certain groups of people inside the organization from seeing it. So if, for example, there was a protected D for defense, I did that right, actually, D for defense. The protected D might only be accessible to one department. A sensitivity label allows me to have that level of control outside of the permission structure of a document. So the security benefits of a sensitivity label are great. But then on top of that, and this is the key feature as it relates to Copilot, we can use a sensitivity label to block Copilot from touching a document. So if we know that there is stuff we don't want Copilot to touch, if we put that sensitivity label on the document, Copilot cannot index it. That is the solution for blocking Copilot from touching sensitive data. That is what Microsoft recommends. So now you're probably thinking to yourself, oh, I have to go create a whole strategy for multiple sensitivity labels and create this whole system of labels that work together or work apart and all this kind of stuff. The recommendation that I always give to people is just get started with one. Start with one sensitivity label that blocks Copilot from indexing something and apply it to your most sensitive information. Call it confidential. Call it secret. Call it Copilot do not touch. Does not matter. As long as you have one in the system and you can apply it to the information you absolutely want to block Copilot from, you are suddenly 10 degrees safer than you ever were before. So if you have a site where all of your human resources stuff is, for example, apply that label to everything in that site, and suddenly there's no risk that Copilot will ever touch or index your human resources data. That level of protection supersedes any other permission, supersedes anything else. And it's also easier to do, theoretically, than trying to get rid of old stuff, than trying to govern things end to end. It's a quick solution that gets us to labeling for blocking and labeling for making sure that we prevent the leakage into Copilot without having to take a ton of extra steps. So Microsoft and I are aligned in our recommendations of getting that one out there. And also don't be worried about over labeling. Because at the worst, if you over label, darn, Copilot can't touch something, probably not the end of the world. If something is, at a point where someone does want it in Copilot, they can also unlabel it. So there's a lot of flexibility there. So generally speaking, sensitivity labels. That is the more you know moment of this webinar as a really good enabler for making sure that you have that control. And then the next layer of that, just to wrap up this slide, is that applying protection on sensitive data using data loss prevention. So once you have a sensitivity label on a document, you could then use what's called DLP, which prevents people from taking that document out of your environment. So if someone wants to work around your security and they say, you're not letting me use Copilot, whatever, I'm going to go use ChatGPT on the public web. That should be red alert on everyone's radar, because that's publicly available information that they're going to put your private information into. And then the public LLM, the public ChatGPT, is going to learn from your data, which is not good. So what What DLP allows us to do is if something is marked as sensitive, it prevents people from downloading it from the environment or taking it out of your environment. That security can allow and block people from doing nefarious things outside of your control with your information. So again, sensitivity labels is an enabler for that. All of the things in the blue path, though, are available through Purview. So Microsoft has given us the tools to start this path. Microsoft has given us a platform to increase protection. And really taking that step in the right direction, some of these things can be boiled down to easy tactical steps in the short run while we work to figure out the big, grander vision for information governance. So generally speaking, problems exist, holes can be poked, and as a result, we worry about the governance of the information and making sure that Copilot can't do nefarious things when we don't want it to. And taking steps in Microsoft 365 as an example to lock down that governance and start improving using the tools that are available to us is an important step because it gets us on the right path to success in the future. So I'll pause there and I will hand over to Steve for the next section on what does this mean?
What does this mean? Thank you, Adriano. I was just going to say what he said and leave it at that, but you know me better than that. So despite your promise that we won't flip back and forth constantly, I'm going to flip back and forth here for a minute as we get into
Last time.
as we get into this. A couple of quick things based on what you just said. Especially to your last point about pick one. One of the things I have long advised clients is do something, do anything, do something, rather than just sit there and feel overwhelmed by the task at hand. Because if you do nothing, I mean, that's a decision too. I decided to do nothing, and the problem just compounds over time. And it compounds quickly because we're talking about information and we're all drowning in it. So I think that's particularly good advice. And then two ironies of sorts. One is we talk about AI and it's this wonderful tool and it's going to allow us to do so much more with our information, and yet at the same time we're talking a lot about how to protect us from it. So it's kind of wide open, exciting, blue sky, and yet how do we limit it? Which seems counterintuitive, except if you let it run rampant, as as we just heard, it can cause problems. You do run the risk of a lot of bad things happening. Sally seeing something she shouldn't is probably the least of it. So I wanted to point that out as well. The second irony of sorts is it's a big task. Governance in general is a big task, and yet the recipe to follow to do it and do it well is actually pretty straightforward. It's pretty clear the things to do in order to take good care of your information so that you can then leverage it with a high degree of confidence that the decisions that you make and the actions that you take based on it are good ones. So there is a lot of noise around it. The work can be challenging. A lot of that is because we're talking about human beings and the way they deal with information. And so the whole notion of culture change is part, which is not the subject of today, but I think worthy of mentioning, particularly in the context of AI, because people think AI is everything from the greatest things since canned toothpaste and sliced beer to it's going to kill us all. The truth is somewhere in between. Because we're talking about a technology that exists exclusively to take information and do something with it. And again, Adriana, you had this on your slide earlier. You have to start by understanding what you have and where it is and who owns it And there's a whole other layer beyond that, which is, okay, what policies do we have that this information is subject to? And are they consistent and uniformly applied? What regulations might we have to follow depending what industry we're in? Government clearly is its own animal that way, but if you're a utility, I refer to all that work as essentially establishing an information baseline, and you can't really do anything without that. And there are tools that allow you to do that to greater or lesser degrees. You can spend anywhere from 8 months to a year, and depending what's going on, I actually have partnered with a tool that lets you do it a whole lot faster than that. It just takes a different approach. But it has to be done, and you can't let the tools just do it, set it and forget it. Because AI or not, you still need to apply your own human discernment to what it finds out. So I wanted to just throw all that out by way of context. All right, now let's talk about AI, and I'm going to broaden this out to AI in general, not just Copilot. The first thing to remember, and kind of picking up where my last comment left off, you have to remember that AI is software. It's not smart, really. It's software. It's definitionally and in practice, it's a simulation of human intelligence. It's not actual human intelligence. And I don't foresee and certainly cannot recommend any circumstance where you just let the thing go, especially when you're talking about governance, because there's lots of gray areas. It's very clear, if you have an invoice, you know what that is, you know what kind of retention it's subject to and all that stuff. But as well as I do, there's lots of information out there that kind of could fit in this category or that category, and sometimes it gets listed as both with different or it's different from department to department. AI is not going to understand those nuances necessarily. And I say that with a high degree of confidence because when you get right down to it, AI is math. It's not magic. It's probability based. How likely is it that the answers that I've come up with are correct given what I know? And that's the key phrase, given what it knows. It only knows what you've told it. It can only decide something based on the information that's available to it. And that's the link between AI and governance right there. AI mostly only knows what it's been fed. And I'll tell you why mostly in a second. But basically the way it works, as a user, you submit a query and you get a result. And that's cool. But if the garbage that if what it's been fed is garbage, you're going to get garbage out. This was a phrase, this whole GIGO thing. I tried to find its origin. It's at least 70 years old. So it dates back in a lot of ways pretty much to the start of computing as a general thing. And it's true. Any computer, it only knows what you tell it. It doesn't know what you mean. And without fully embracing that, you can really end up going off course in ways that can be quite risky. You also miss some opportunities to do good things with that information. If you think about business intelligence as a practice, it's the same thing. You analyze the data and you get a dashboard and you make decisions. But if the underlying information is faulty or incomplete, your decisions get weakened. I mean, it can't help but follow. It's all about the information quality. How accurate is it? How timely is it? What's its provenance? There's a difference between provenance and citation. So citation and the AI engines generally have gotten a lot better at this. And here I'm talking specifically about the public ones, because it used to just get an answer. Now most of them will tell you where it found the answer. But that doesn't tell you whether or not the answer that it found is a good one or fully vetted. That's what the provenance is. So again, back to what are you trying to do? What information do you have? Where does it come from? Who owns it? Those kinds of questions have to do with provenance. And then security, which is all kinds of security, even on a perimeter security, when you're talking about hardware, access and stuff. Part of that inventory, part of that baseline has to be, where is the information stored? Because if you understand where your most sensitive stuff is, then you have to prioritize protecting that repository, that site, that, whatever stack that is. So good information really is the root of all. Data and records, structured and unstructured. And again, as we heard before, that data in a certain way has a head start, but they do all the same things that we've always done on the record side of things. They just call it something else. On the data side, if you think about extract, transform, and load, which is like a fundamental database activity, that's really no different than taking the information out of SharePoint, cleaning it up, and putting it back. Same thing, different words. So there's plenty of fertile ground there, especially in the context of AI, to either get invited into or insinuate ourselves into those conversations. That's absolutely so critical. And it is starting to happen, and more and more. And I think that's great. It's so necessary. Starting with basic findability. Where is it? Can I find it? Can I get to it? What about these workarounds? I have plenty of clients where I hear, oh, I know I'm supposed to put it over here in this stack, but I don't have access to it, even though I'm supposed to. So I just stick it in our shared drive because I still need to do my job. But there's probably an original or something similar from some other group in that repo. Now you have multiple copies, and they don't say the same things. You don't know which one's real. So classification, the relevance, the context. Why are you accessing this? What are you doing with this information? Also critical. Also something to be found out kind of upstream as part of that baseline, getting at not just the wheres and the whats, but the why. It all relates. Oh, by the way, all that stuff, that's governance. There's nothing magic about it. But it as a phrase, it encompasses all of that. AI specifically requires governance because lacking it, it really takes the risk to another level. So never mind that it's prone to hallucination, and we've all heard the stories, it makes stuff up. So I remember, and this hasn't happened recently, but if you want to have some fun, put your own name into a public AI engine and see what comes up. Because I learned that I have a bachelor's in computer science from ChatGPT. And I thought that was cool because I never went to school for that. But apparently I earned the degree. I don't know. It's also ruminant. So I coined that phrase because it's ruminant like a cow or a sheep, where they chew their own cuds. Because AI, as I said, it operates on the information that's available to it, and that includes the information it itself has generated. So if it misses the mark on something, that's just going to compound the next time it answers a query that requires the same kind of research. It's going to look at what it produced as new input for the next thing. And so you can get further and further away from the point. AI is biased because as humans, when we create documents and things, we have a bias. And you hear about this in research and academic and scientific communities. But even customer research, you may not have a true representation of your client base. And yet you're going to base your decisions on information from this segment of a market instead of the whole market. You've seen the headline, the 1948 presidential election in the States. Dewey defeats Truman. It was wrong. You know why? Because the newspaper did a telephone poll, but it was 1948. Only a certain kind of voter demographic had a phone. So it ended up drawing perhaps the right conclusion given the information it was based on, but it was wrong. It was incomplete. And then lastly, which is more a socio-environmental kind of comment, but AI is a real power hog. And that's something just to be aware of, I think, in general. And it's becoming more and more visible as more and more of these companies build bigger and bigger power stations and data centers. Um, we benefit, but if you're living in that community, it raises lots of different kinds of questions, which I won't get into. But if we're talking about AI and the risks, it's pretty wide ranging. So, okay, never mind all that. And I touched on this already. AI lacks discernment. The results are based on math, not understanding, meaning if it doesn't know, it'll guess. And it may not tell you it's a guess unless you ask. And it still happens. Because I'll get something. Okay, here's a weird example, but my family created this own little fantasy baseball thing. I'm a big baseball guy, and it's really kind of fun. And once in a while, can't decide what player to activate. And I thought, you know what, just for grins, I'm going to ask a couple of different AI engines. And one of them came back with, well, such and so, you shouldn't probably keep, he's promising, but until he makes the major leagues, he's been in the major leagues for a month and a half. So I said that to the AI engine. Hey, and it said, oh, yes, I'm sorry. He has been in the major leagues. If I didn't ask, it's wrong. In a business context, guessing wrong can be highly consequential. It can, depending on the use case, it can set you up to be fined for noncompliance. In a legal context, you might be sanctioned. And you miss these opportunities to mine the data in a way that can really help your organization. It can help if it's process data. Sorry, Adriano, I have to speak Canadian. If it's process data, it can help you run more efficiently. You'll discover bottlenecks that you can eliminate based on process metrics. The better serving your customers I talked about, just clearing out office space from all the paper files means you can add more people without having to pay for more real estate. So there's opportunities in there too. It's not just about risk. AI is just another tool. And I think it's important that you remember that it requires the same governance as any other tool you're going to use. And it doesn't require special treatment. In terms of policies, you probably already have existing policies around other technology stacks and existing practices that already apply. So it isn't that maybe you don't need something specific to AI, but you want to be cognizant of the fact that you may already have stuff that apply. You don't need to complicate it by adding something else. So a lot of the privacy policies that you have, for instance, would apply here without having to reinvent the wheel. It's like the early days of social media. It started with, we need a policy for Facebook. We need a policy for, I already drew a blank, the Google version of Facebook, and then suddenly we realized, oh, Twitter. Oh, we realized what we need is a social media policy, not an individual one for each offering. The same is true here. Okay, so how do we get started? If I can get this to advance. Retention disposition, as Adriano said, it's a good place to start. I've buried everybody on all my screens here. You guys ever heard of Swedish death cleaning? Adriano, yours is the only face I can see. I'd never
I've
heard of it.
heard of
You have?
Yeah, my wife is Scandinavian, so she's mentioned it.
Okay. Well, if you don't know, the idea is, and it's more of a cultural social thing. Like before you pass away, you clean your house with a vengeance so your kids don't have to. And we use this as a foundation for one of the monthly community roundtables that some of us do. And I love it because it makes the point. In an information context, doing a Swedish death cleaning is a really good idea for a lot of reasons, including if that data isn't there, it can't be input into AI and it can't be relied upon engines or humans. If it's so old as to not be helpful or even hurtful, don't have it there. And then it can't accidentally leak out or cause problems. So for me, I love the fact that there is this Swedish death cleaning thing because it also makes it sound less scary as a discipline. And when you do it, and whether you're doing it as part of cleaning or just, general good practice, you want to document the policies and procedures. And you want to keep them simple so that they're clear. I have learned this multiple times over the years with multiple clients because I keep hearing people say, I'm new to the position, or I've been here in this job for 2 years. And when I got here, the person before me didn't write anything down. I don't know how to do anything. I don't know what goes on here. I'm still trying to figure it out because none of it was documented. So it's this constant cycle of figuring it out anew and re-implementing the way things get done and how information is protected and all. Do it, document it, and then maintain it. So this is not just for AI, but AI in particular, because there is turnover, because organizations don't do a tremendously great job overall of cleaning the information before seeking AI on it. They come away disappointed, and the cycle just continues. So everything that we learn and decisions that we make based on it really should be written down so the next group of people don't have to start all over again. Very quickly, there are other guidelines to keep in mind. My favorite goes back to when I started doing this kind of work a gazillion years ago. It all boils down to what business problem you're trying to solve. You don't know if you solved it if you haven't defined it, which is another reason organizations can be disappointed, never mind with their AI activities, but governance in general, because they're just doing it because somebody said do it. And we don't know why, so you don't know when you're finished. You want to automate where you can, because there's plenty of opportunity to introduce human error, sometimes intentionally if you've got a political fiefdom battle going on internally, or just because you have a disgruntled employee. I've seen this too. You probably have as well. Somebody's leaving and they're angry, they got laid off, and they delete everything before they leave. If it had been automatically backed up or protected, maybe that doesn't happen. Education, training, we all talk about. What we don't tend to talk about is enforcement. So having policies and things are great. It's great and is necessary. But if it doesn't get enforced, it might as well not exist. And you need good cop, not just bad cop. Bad cop comes in and threatens, do this or you're fired or your performance review gets it. But you also need a good cop because people feed off of praise and validation. And then we get into the organizational culture change thing of it, and you really need both. And then the last point I'll leave you with is, even though AI itself, in a lot of ways, is the next shiny object, it is a project like anything else. And it should be treated as any other project. You need to think through who's involved and what we're trying to accomplish and what's the timetable, and do we want to do a test first instead of just pushing the button and go. I have a colleague talks about start small, grow big. It's entirely true here. And because the consequences can be so pervasive, it may be more important, because you can get, the more automated you become and the more you leave up to the automation, like AI, the faster you can get yourself in trouble. So take it small, test it out, start with a use case, start with a department. Then you can use that, of course, to roll it out to other parts of the organization, because now you've got a success you can point to. And then continue to do the progress review so that you can improve it over time instead of just assuming we did it once and we're done. Because no part of information governance has that as a truth. In truth, you're never really done because we keep getting more information and we keep getting new sites popping up and we keep getting new people coming in. So you have to go back and check the same way you get a physical every year, or should, as a human, you should give your system, I don't know, it's not a physical. Do you give it an electronic? I don't know what you call that. But there has to be some kind of a maintenance check-in that goes on so that you can course correct while it's still manageable, as opposed to letting it go and finding out later, oh no, we got to do this again. That never goes over well. So, what's next? How about this, Adriano? I will show the next step slide so we don't have to switch ownership again.
Yep, that's really a simple one. So we've talked a lot today about getting better at AI and getting better at information governance, and that's not an easy task. But the good news is people like Steve and I are always here to help. We want to be able to give you the information that you can take back to your leaders, take back to your organizations, take back to whoever you like, and use it to get better. So we like to just open-endedly offer. We have a 4-hour discovery workshop that is no cost to you, that essentially just allows us to do a little bit of a diagnostic and give you a little bit of an idea of where you could go and where you want to go. And in doing so, we can give you just a really quick roadmap that gives you a path. And sometimes all you need is a path to know what you're doing is either on the right track, off track, or completely wild, and you need to see it back on track as best as possible. So, excuse me, leave that as an open-ended option. If you're interested, reach out to us, and we're more than happy to help.
We'll take good care of you, that I can promise. It's what we do. And I always tell people, don't do it for me. I like it, but let's do it for you. That's all I got.
All good from my side too. Looks like Julie has a question.
Julie would have a question. Go ahead, caller.
Well, actually, it's more of Sarah's comment. I don't know if you had an opportunity to see that. No, the presentation was great. This gives us a lot to think about, and I appreciate that. But Sarah, I don't know if you have a moment to talk a little bit about that experience with Claude
Oh,
deleting
I'm looking at it now.
databases and all of
Yeah.
that. I mean, it goes quite a bit along the lines of, like Copilot, it's doing unintended actions because it thinks that it should. So I don't know if you have a minute to elaborate on that.
Can I talk just in general for 15 seconds, Adriano, and then I'll let you bring it down to the Copilot level. This really speaks to a much broader issue, which has to do about the way you engage with third parties. And it's not a new issue. We have our own policies governing deletion, dispensable disposition, all that stuff. It doesn't necessarily mean that a third party you're working with has the same ones or will honor yours or will afford you protection or even will give you a ready mechanism to download the information that's being processed like in the cloud. That speaks to needing to take a very careful look at your service level agreement with these third parties, ideally before you sign one so you understand what you're getting into. So it's a great question. And yeah, I mean, if the vendor, like in this case, Claude, if it just deletes stuff that you were counting on, you probably don't have any recourse, certainly not if you're not paying for the service.
Thank you, Adriano and Steve. Oh, you have something you want to add, Adriano?
I was just going to add, like, again, controlling what these AI agents are able to do and setting up rules and governance around what AI is permitted to be used for is important, right? I think that That's obviously nightmare fuel scenario to have your entire database deleted in 6 seconds, but it's clear to me that they didn't stop it from happening. They didn't have the controls in place to stop Claude from doing that. So that is as much their fault as it is Claude's fault.
Right.
I'm going to put you both on the spot. I'm assuming if with your 4-hour assessment, it expands into what AI tools. Obviously, there's the shadow IT, as we call it, but you're kind of exploring what tools people that you're aware of are using, and what you have is kind of part of helping you determine, again, who owns it, where's it at, who's doing what.
That is a topic of conversation. Yes.
Okay. So it doesn't just focus on the Microsoft tools.
No.
Okay.
It all has
Right.
to exist in a context. It's another good question. Maybe we should have Julie facilitate these from now on. She's
All
good at
good.
it.
I hide behind the scenes these days, as you know. No, this is great. I really appreciate it. It's always something thoughtful. Still learning myself on how to address a lot of this stuff. So thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you guys for coming.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
See you on
Have
the
a great
internet.
day. Okay. Bye.
Bye.